Matt Robeson, Beyond Politics, and today our word of the day is schism. We are seeing major schisms in both parties over the last week, not to mention between the two parties, which we've seen for years now. And the questions are, how big are these rifts? Who are they hurting? And what will it mean for the balance of power in 2026 and beyond if they can't be sewn back together? On the Democratic side, the long-simmering split between mainline Democrats and progressives was thrust into center stage on Tuesday by Zohran Mamdani's victory in the New York City Democratic primary for mayor. It's become kind of a Rorschach test for both wings of the party. Mainline Democrats are saying it was really about blowback to a scandal-hit establishment figure. Progressives think it's a sign that cultural liberalism and populist economics is a winning formula. Yesterday, I wrote an article on Substack in which I argued yes and to both points. Yes, this was a very special case, and yes, there is a generalizable lesson to be drawn from what worked for Mamdani. But overall, it seems like there's really one overriding reason that Mamdani won, and I'm going to get into it in this episode because if Democrats can see it, it suggests a way to heal the breach. On the Republican side, the issues run no less deep. The split within the Republican Party over Donald Trump's one big beautiful bill was eclipsed in the past week only by the split within the party over Donald Trump's decision to bomb Iran. And all of that is barely papering over the bigger divide between actual political conservatives and Donald Trump's cult of MAGA personality that really has no specific ideology or coherent economic theory at all. Republicans not only need to navigate this Senate bill over the summer, which may be their one true shot at legislating while they have the trifecta of the presidency, the House, and the Senate until the midterms, but they also are going to need to contend with a midterm election where, if history is any guide, Donald Trump a net negative for their ticket, and simply saying they're with him may not be a winning strategy. And then beyond that, as the era of Trump begins to end, they have to start to contend with what they are about in 2028 and beyond. And of course, all of that is a subset of the bigger schism in America between the two political parties. And I get into this later in the episode as well, but I want to take a moment to quote from my friend, my recent guest, the psychologist and pollster, Lauren Goldstein. She made a really important distinction on her Substack this week, and I think it's worth knowing. From Lauren Goldstein, here's the quote. Political polarization is routinely discussed but infrequently defined. Researchers who study polarization actually draw a big distinction between two different types. The first is ideological. This refers to the idea that Democrats and Republicans are taking increasingly polarized positions on key issues. Democrats staking out positions further to the left, Republicans further to the right. There's plenty of evidence that ideological polarization is real and worsening among political elites, i.e., elected officials, high-ranking members of the party infrastructure, etc. But we don't actually have conclusive evidence that this is happening to the same degree among regular voters. In fact, research has found that folks tend to overestimate the degree to which regular people are ideologically polarized. We often caricature the other side based on its most outlandish or vocal faction, but that's not always representative of the group at large. But the kind of polarization that is unmistakably happening among regular voters is affective. That's with an A, affective. The tendency to evaluate members of your own party positively and members of the opposing party negatively. There's a mountain of evidence that this is widespread among the mass public and with far-reaching consequences. Affective polarization influences not just how we evaluate each other in the context of political conversations. It extends to who we want to hire or who we are willing to date. It's also a domain of intergroup bias that is less tethered to social norms about prejudice than others. People are typically much more comfortable expressing explicit dislike of out-group partisans than, say, people of different races, religions, or cultures. So, all of that is the third schism, and what Lauren is talking about is the fact that we often misunderstand where the divide truly lies in America between the parties. To get into all of this, I was really happy to welcome back Matt Wiley, who's a top Republican political consultant after a career of being a Republican campaign manager. And look, If you're relatively new to my Substack or this podcast, you might be a little surprised to hear that I regularly feature Republican voices on my show, but I do because I think it gives us all a much greater insight into how the broad swath of Americans sees things, what Republicans are thinking, and frankly, it gives a really helpful way to step outside the Democratic Party echo chamber. And of course, I do appreciate the fact that Matt is not afraid to lob figurative bombs at Trump or his own party. But most important, I hope that the more constructive conversations between Republicans and Democrats, like the kind I try to have with Matt whenever he's a guest, can be helpful in breaking through the effective polarization and even to better understand where the true ideological polarization lies. Where are the differences? And where's the common ground? And therefore, what is what I believe to be the vast scope of compromise that's available on all kinds of issues that matter for Americans' lives, if we can just summon the political will to reach for it? And finally, as you'll hear in this conversation, Matt correctly predicted that Republicans would be using the Mamdani victory to caricature other members of the Democratic Party. Not something he condones necessarily as fair or accurate, but something that is the most expedient way for a political campaign to attack their opponents. After we recorded this, Matt sent me an example of this exact thing happening instantly in the New Hampshire Senate race to the Democratic candidate, an avowed moderate who I actually know. So with that, here we go with the schisms in both parties and between the parties with Matt and Matt. Matt, it's been a minute.
It has been.
Okay, dealer's choice. Both parties, it's amazing that both parties are like in the midst of a little bit of an internal meltdown. The consulting class is nervous. The activist and operative class is nervous. Everyone's a little bit unhappy. We're going to interrogate both of them. You want to do the Dems first?
Yeah, let's do it. I think this week gave the Republicans one of the greatest political gifts of the 26 election cycle. So when I thought it can't get worse for us, you guys go and nominate a socialist.
Oh, gosh. Oh, you're just like you're leading into our fears. You're like Freddy Krueger. It's I'm coming for you in your dreams. So let's truth serum this for a second. As a professional consultant strategist, you are, and I want to separate this from Matt Wiley, the analyst, and your personal thoughts.
Sure.
As a professional matter, you and the other Republican political consultants are definitely in a room somewhere concocting new synonyms for socialist to beat Democrats over the head with in 26. This is right in your playbook. You're all
without question.
Yeah. Okay.
Without question.
You're literally doing this right now. Are you all texting each other fire emojis?
We sit around in our little clubs and we talk about this stuff all the time. It really is that deep state. That's what we do.
Did you ever see The Simpsons where Montgomery Burns is like at Republican Party headquarters and like the other members of the Republican Party are like the Texas Oil Man and Dracula? And
that one hit a little too close to home, but yes, like that.
Oh gosh. Okay.
But it's the best thing that could have happened to the Republican Party this cycle from a strategy perspective. Again, from a strategy, what am I going to do when I advise candidates to run? I am using him every step of the way. It was Pelosi for such a long time. And now look at all the problems in New York. Look at how bad it's going to be. It's going to be worse. You haven't seen anything yet. It is going to be the gift that just keeps on giving for us as a party. And all those states where maybe Democrats are, look, midterms we know are tough for the incumbent party. I think you guys just helped us out. I really do. I think it's just perfect.
Are you still seeing the same thing in polling that I've seen over the past 5 years, but I haven't updated my numbers on it in a while, that applying the socialism label adds about a 10-point penalty to Democratic candidates? Is that still the case in general?
That's about right. And look, we've had some trouble in the past, but AOC, Bernie Sanders brought this mainstream for us. And so now socialism and applying that directly to the candidate, those independents, those moderates right there, they are struggling with this. And when you just look at the presidential election. We can argue Harris, bad candidate. We can argue whatever. When you get in those blue states when we got into the economy and we got into what was coming by the government, there were a lot of traditional Democrat voters that just shied away from the socialist kind of moniker. And I think what is happening over and over with the Democrats now, and look, I think we'll get into this too. I think the Republicans have a similar problem, but I think what's happening over and over is Democrat primary voters are embracing these extreme sides of your party, and it's going to hurt you, and it's going to continue to hurt you because it's easy for us to just point and say, this is the direction. You may consider yourself a Democrat, but are you really that kind of Democrat? Are you really a socialist? And that helps us in elections.
All right, let me make a case that maybe the Mamdani situation may be a little bit different and a little bit better. You may not be able to hang this on Democrats quite as much as you have in the past, or you might otherwise be able to. It comes out of my Substack piece yesterday, in which I said, look, Nate Silver made an argument that when you have a decisive result, there's usually many factors involved. You have to go with an all of the above explanation. And I said, all right, fair enough. Usually true. But sometimes also a cigar is just a cigar. And in this case, I think there's one obvious blaring reason that Mamdani won, which is he nailed the haiku, the old James Carville 1992 Bill Clinton campaign mantra of change versus more of the same, the economy stupid, and don't forget healthcare. And the first one being the most important, change, be the change candidate. Whoever wins the change argument definitively wins elections in modern America in the last 30 or 40 years. That is the number one thing you can do to win a campaign, is say that you represent change, because we know at baseline voters hate the status quo. And beyond that, we have such a mountain of evidence. We have such an incredible weight of evidence that the number one thing on voters' minds right now is the economy, by which they really mean costs, the cost input side of the economy. Guess where Democrats are actually relatively strong, notwithstanding Joe Biden and inflation, is the cost side of the economy. And voters are relatively open-minded to government interventions, especially in healthcare, if they affect the cost side. What Mamdani did was, first of all, he had the gift of running against a scandal-tarred sexual predator, old guard,
Sure,
literally a lab creation of the old, like the
right.
stale establishment, who happened to be pretty obnoxious and didn't exactly have a great table image with Democrats.
Right.
And he got to contrast it by being the change candidate, like representing in his diversity and his youth, just embodying change in every possible way. And he focused like a laser beam on costs. Now, where I think the opportunity for you guys will lie is his specific prescriptions, which were free public transit, freeze the rent, city-owned grocery stores. You could rightly say, oh, that seems pretty liberal, it seems pretty socialist, but the underlying thing that he's talking about may not actually be that obnoxious to voters, saying, I'm going to try everything to get your costs down. So that's my position on this. Do you think the fact that he is so focused on the economy, so focused on costs, will insulate the Democratic Party in general from having Mamdani hung on them? It's, oh, you guys are, but he really gets it when it comes to costs.
Yeah, I think that is making yourselves feel better with what's getting ready to come down. Look, everything you said is true. The reason he won this was a perfect storm. Adams is running as an independent.
Right.
Cuomo's a disaster. The rest of the candidates, he ran a good campaign too. He attracted younger voters and got younger voters out, and it didn't rely on traditional tactics. So all that stuff is 100% true. I think though, and look, again, we'll get to this. It's an indictment of the primary process. It really is, because we nominate these extreme candidates who, in some cases, struggle to win. Who knows if he wins? If this is a 3-way, 4-way race for mayor coming up, who knows if he actually wins this thing? Right. And look, If I take off my strategist hat, I'll tell you midterm elections, these off-year elections are meaningless. They tell me nothing about what's going to happen in an election. But as a strategist, I'm still going to hang that around your neck as much as I can as a boat anchor. I'm going to use it to pull you down. I'm going to take every radical statement that he says. And again, my audience isn't Republicans and my audience isn't a lot of Democrats. My audience is going to be those voters. It may be some traditional blue states, maybe New Hampshire, maybe even some of the districts in Connecticut, some of these that have identified as a Democrat for such a long time, but they look at him, they look at what he's proposing, they look at socialism. These are people, in some cases, these are people that fought in wars to stop socialism. And they can't see that as where their Democratic Party is going to go. And they can't pull that lever just because they're worried that could be the case. We saw it, quite frankly, we saw it in 2018 when Republicans in some of these blue states, even though they may have said they were not with Donald Trump, those same moderate independent voters were just like, I'm not sure. I like what this Republican says, but if he's a Trumper, if he's a MAGA person in disguise, I'm not voting for it. And I think that's the problem that you're going to run into isn't necessarily this ecosystem in New York City. That's a unique set of, there's a lot of problems in New York. He made the right case and he won, but it's not going to stop me and others from using it to try and persuade conservative Democrats and independents that the party they think they're a part of isn't what they believe in anymore. And so I do think it has an impact.
Yeah. No, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And what you're taking advantage of here is the fact that the numbers continue to go relentlessly down in terms of how much voters are paying attention. Voters pay very little attention. It's a corollary of the fact that Americans are more and more, or at least consistently, dissatisfied with how things are going. They are more and more turned off by the news. Now, look, there's also an interpretation of that, which that helps the authoritarian project, because what Trump types want is for people to tune out, be disengaged, say, this is all so unpleasant that we'll just leave it to you. We just leave us alone to live our lives.
I don't want this. Yeah.
This entire thing is just so obnoxious to me. So this is a dangerous thing. But for Republicans running against Democrats, I can see why the easiest path is to take advantage of this, because the details will get washed out. I think a lot of what Mamdani is proposing from a strict policy standpoint is unworkable. But I also think if you got into it with voters, if we were doing this live, which we will do at some point, and we were like getting live chats from the kinds of people who engage on the channel when I do these live streams, they would be saying a lot of progressive policies are actually quite popular. There's a lot of polling that backs that up. And I think that's because people are not actually that ideologically polarized.
To build on that point, look at what Republicans are proposing. You know, Josh Hawley wants to increase the minimum wage.
Yes.
As a Republican, I'm sitting here going, what in the world are you thinking? But that's no different than what the Democrats have been proposing forever. Trump has talked about taxing the rich. Trump has talked about price controls on prescription drugs. These are all policies that as Republicans, we have been against forever. But yet Trump is proposing them. Our Republicans are getting around them. They're rallying behind a lot of those pieces, largely because, like you said, with social media and the clips and what they can do, it's so easy just to not pay attention and not think it through and just get fed a piece of information. And so I agree. I think some of those progressive policies are what Trump is also starting to embrace simply because they are popular.
They are popular because what Trump got right from the beginning, and I've written about this, I've talked about it, I don't want to go over the same ground too much again, but what Trump fundamentally got right is the deep level of economic distress, dissatisfaction, anger in the country, the 30 or 40 years of the erosion of wages and income,
Mhm.
paired with the rise in the cost of living. Now, Democrats have always been good on the cost of living side, but have not been so good at being forthright about, yeah, immigration is a factor in depressing wages. And our trade, we've been all at sixes and sevens, as our British friends would say. Now, Trump has made Republicans all at sixes and sevens when it comes to trade as well. All those swim lanes have gotten scrambled. But the point is, if we were doing this live right now and people were in the chat saying, gee, progressive policies are actually way more popular, they would be 100% right. And that's
Correct.
something that Trump has cottoned on to. And Josh Hawley, in his recent New York Times op-ed, talking
Mhm.
about, hey, Republicans, do not slash Medicaid. What the fuck are you doing? He's cottoned on to that too. So
Right.
we can use this as a segue to talk about Republicans. Look, I think the bottom line for me is you're probably right. Here, let's
Mhm.
put the Democrats to bed on this. I think you're probably right. I think that it is going to work if Mamdani wins in the general. It is going to work to point to him to run the playbook that you guys have run
Mhm.
since time immemorial, the socialism label, the dysfunction of big
Yep.
cities.
Yep.
All of that is still going to work.
Crime. Don't
If,
forget crime.
yes, if at the same time, if the discussion were about the actual policies, it's not that different to talk about freezing prices on prescription drugs and
Mhm.
freezing prices on the rent. And that
Yeah.
is actually probably a pretty popular policy. But the problem is you can't get into, if you're explaining, you're losing. And
100% correct.
that's the thing, is that in a campaign, you don't get to the level of saying, let's look at the policies. Do you like these policies? Because if you
Right.
did, it'd be great. The DSA is right about that, but it's not going to help with the political project.
No, no. And I think that's why, quite frankly, I think that's why Republicans continue to be the forecast, I think, is going to be good for Republicans just because they're able to control that message a little bit better. Look, as a strategist, I look ahead and I say, okay, what's going to happen in the midterms? Can we win this thing? History's not on our side. I think as Republicans, we're making mistake after mistake. But I do think the Democrats are keeping us in the game. And that's why it's neither team really wants to win. It's just going to be which one's going to outlast the other. And right now, if I'm guessing, I'm going to say Republicans are going to outperform what they should outperform in the midterms simply because Democrats keep us in the game. And I think this is exactly an example of that.
My deep Democratic heart wants to get to the part where you're talking about how bad Republicans are internally and like how much messing up. Let's just put that in the parking lot for just 2 minutes, because I want to pick up on the piece you said at the end there, and this idea of my friend Lauren Goldstein, who I recently had on the live stream and on this podcast. She's a psychologist and a pollster. She just wrote a Substack piece where she was drawing a distinction between ideological polarization. There's a lot of $50 words in here, so just
Mhm.
bear with me. Ideological polarization and effective, not affective polarization. And she goes through the evidence and the data. And remember, she's a psychologist. And what she basically points out is there is not much ideological polarization in America. It is not that people are divided in terms of their ideology and their outlook, and that they're wedded to the labels that we put on ideology, left or right, in America. Now, this goes right to the Hidden Tribes report that found that 85% of us are in the discouraged middle. And it's
Mhm.
really about 7 or 8% that are on the extremes. And those happen to be the most politically active and the loudest in the media. But the rest of us really are in this ideological gray zone where we don't feel as strongly about the political philosophy of it. There's effective polarization, though. There is very strong emotionality to the your team, our team thing. And I think that's one of the reasons why I like to have you on this show, I like to have Alicia on this show, because I keep hoping to chip away at the fact that I wish we could get over that, because actually it goes back to what we were saying a moment ago. Underlying populist policies are pretty popular. And if we could take some of the effective polarization, the spy versus spy, bled, there you go, bled versus rue, red versus blue, the bled part is really the effective part of that. If we could get the color wars out of it, which is not to say that I want to give up on my political party, because I think it's a lot more complex than that, but it in a way that obscures the tremendous amount of agreement that there is in America, and it ends up being of ineffective, waste of time, waste of energy nonsense. You know?
Sure. Yeah,
now,
I agree.
It's good nonsense for political consultants like you.
Exactly. Look, I think I think you're right, but I think it's also we have this ingrained since the birth of our nation that there are sides. And I think what ultimately voters look for, and it's just now it's on steroids because of social media, is that it is who's my side? How can I defend them? And who do I trust to do it if I can't make up my mind? I'm sure you do. I run into people all the time who are like that, but I really don't like that. It's on my side a lot. It's I like what Trump's doing, but I don't, but Biden would have been bad. And there's always this rationale. And I think what it gets down to, if I'm really being honest here, is people just don't feel comfortable talking about politics. They feel like they don't know enough. And so when you really press somebody on it, we choose sides because it gives us cover for saying what we want to say because we don't necessarily feel comfortable talking to someone like you or talking to someone like me because they feel like I just know too much and I can't compete. And I think what we really have to do is get people comfortable in saying you live on this planet, you live in this country, you know everything you need to know to talk about politics. Go engage, go have fun, because we've all formed these decisions, but I think sides gets in the way. Now, look, I personally think my side, pre-MAGA especially, is right on these issues. But I will also concede that sometimes we get a little better when we have that disagreement. When we could sit at the table and say, hey, this is the way I think I should do it. You say this is what we should do. We come up, we hammer it out, we come up with something good, and then we end up balancing the budget or we end up fixing some of the problems we actually should fix.
That's my entire reason, what you just said, my entire reason that going back to having Republicans like you and Alicia on to talk about this, the entire reason that I have always wanted to have a functional Republican Party as a loyal opposition is that it actually makes the Democratic Party better. What is when you don't have, okay, I'm gonna invert this a little bit because you brought in the MAGA part of this.
Sure.
In a way, the unity that Donald Trump has forced among Democrats is the worst thing that's ever happened to us.
Yes.
Because we have been forced, like the Greek city-states, to unite against Xerxes. And we did it in 2018. We did it in 2020. We even did it in 2022. Didn't quite come off in 2024 for all kinds of reasons. But what it's allowed us to do, unfortunately, is to have things fester within the Democratic Party that really need to be worked out. Mm-hmm. And it's no longer possible for us to have conversations because it's either, hey, you're either with the Trump people or you're not. You're either fighting the hated Voldemort enemy or you're not. It's made it really hard to engage in conversations about some pretty tricky issues, like immigration, for example. We have allowed ourselves, especially in 2020, to be pushed into a pretty extreme position when it comes to immigration. We allowed ourselves to be pushed into a pretty extreme position, at least a slogan, when it came to policing circa 2020. And there are all kinds of reasons for that, but there's no doubt that it hurt us. A party that exists without that counter pressure from the other side, that's like a legit play to the center, a party that is going to get itself off course. And
Mhm.
I think the tragedy for Republicans is that as Democrats have gotten ourselves into a little bit of a schism here between the kind of traditional Democrats and the let's call them the socialist, right, like wing of the party, the progressive wing of the party. That means that we're not being as effective a counter pressure play toward
Mhm.
the center for Republicans, and that's allowed MAGA Republicanism to fester on your side.
It 100% has. And I'll take it a couple different directions too. I think the reason going back to nominating socialists is because your primary voters now are looking for that counter to Trump and
Right.
anything in the
They
midterm.
want someone to fight. That's the number one
Right.
finding consistently in polling is Democrats don't care whether you're a socialist, you're a blue
Mhm.
dog, you're a whatever. The number one thing they're looking for is a fighter. Agree.
Exactly.
Agree.
Exactly. And so it's as it's pushed your party further perception wise out there and to the left, what I think one of the great tragedies here is as Republicans, and I've written about this too, is we have the Senate, the House, the White House. We had an opportunity to show America what conservative leadership could look like. Not the executive orders, not all this random stuff that's going on. A little bit of the fight we're
Not
having with
illegally renditioning people to foreign gulags,
the
contrary
fight
to
over
the
the big beautiful
Constitution.
bill, like that should have been happening a long time ago, but we're not. And we're not because look, we had this opportunity. You guys were on the ropes. We beat you. We picked up the House, picked up the Senate. Like we're in a spot where we could have just put our foot on your neck and just put you guys out into the wilderness for decades. We screwed it up. We
And the way to
absolutely
do
screwed
that,
up.
I'm going to interpret a little bit, but the way to do that would have been a robust play for the center. It would have
Mhm.
been a, hey, you know what? We're going to show you what a functional but conservative
Mhm.
approach to government and the economy and
Right.
trade and immigration, what a, to borrow from George W. Bush, what a compassionate
Mhm.
conservative approach to America looks like. We are going to make that so compelling, so
Mhm.
attractive that it's going to force the Democrats into an untenable position. And
Exactly.
what that would have done, that would have actually been healthy for Democrats, is it would have forced us to respond, to
Mhm.
compete, to vie for the center ground. And
Right.
instead, what you're finding is this. The most recent, I shared this with you before the
Mhm.
show. According to Navigator polling, both parties are fighting the same battle that we do cycle after cycle, or who is going to be more hated. And
Right.
it's just, can we make the other side more distasteful? Because Trump is underwater in the
Mhm.
battleground districts, in the districts where you consult, in the tough to win congressional districts and Senate races.
Right.
Trump is underwater. Okay. He's about 7 points underwater there,
Mm.
especially on the economy. Republicans, as a brand, are underwater. Now,
Mhm.
Democrats, it's an interesting situation. Named Democrats, meaning if you say, do you like John Ossoff, Senator John Ossoff? Do you like, I don't know, pick a
Nancy
swing
Pelosi.
district
Yeah.
Democrat? If you name the Democrat, they're doing better than named Republicans in these battleground districts. But as a brand, the Democratic Party is actually more underwater than the Republican Party.
Yeah.
And so that means the most expedient path for political consultants who right now, I promise you, are like, I've been on a million, you're on these every week, right? You're on
Mhm.
a million of these campaign consulting calls. The most expedient path to get your candidate to win is, how are we going to attack the weaknesses,
Mhm.
other side? We're not playing for the center. We're not trying to get that fat middle 85%
No.
of voters. We are just going to try to gin up the 7 or 8% on our side and get them to show up in a low turnout midterm.
I'm trying to scare you if you really want to get down to it. Like at the end of the day, I'm trying to scare voters into not voting for the Democrat. That's all I need to do. And I'm going to take the easiest path to get there. I'm going to run all the ads that everybody complains about, but I'm going to do it because it is the easiest way. And I think that's the Republicans' missed opportunity is there are districts, New Hampshire 1, Connecticut 5. There's some out west and blue states that Republicans could win if we actually had started this year with a robust conservative approach to governance, and we could have expanded our majorities so that we're not sitting there with 1 or 2 votes that we can't have. Instead, we chose a different path. And now, because we're so far into this path, we've just set ourselves up for this same idea that the only way we're going to hold these majorities is just to appeal to the nastiness of politics.
Trump was your original sin, right? Because you
Well,
really
yeah.
grabbed the wolf by the ears with that one. Because now all Republicans can do is hang on lest he turn his head and consume you. And that's your fucking problem right there, because you have signed on to the MAGA project. You as a party.
Right. Republicans in general, yes.
And it's eaten the Republican Party from the inside. Now, if Trump turns on you in a primary, if Trump ghosts you, if his money machine doesn't get behind you, as a candidate, you are screwed. And it's a cudgel that's looming over, and it prevents Republicans from getting out of this. They have locked themselves into this MAGA cabinet, and it's pretty freaking awful, especially because it is so repellent and obnoxious to traditional conservatives. This is what drives our mutual friend Alicia crazy and into semi-retirement from being on the show, is at a certain point, there's only so many times that you can scream from the rooftops. I actually became a Republican because I revere the Constitution, and I believe that the judicial branch, you cannot simply ignore legal orders.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't do that. We're not about sending people to foreign gulags. We're not about knifing our NATO allies to suck up to Vladimir Putin. What are we doing here? What are we doing here? Anyway, you know what? I just started us where I deeply wanted to go. Let's talk about the Republican schism. Hawley, Medicaid.
Yes.
This is a real problem. This is a real problem for Republicans, because Hawley has correctly identified that where the energy is in America, it's the same point I was making in my Substack, where the energy is in America on the right or the left, Republican or Democrat, is for change and for dealing with costs and for dealing with the economic anxiety that comes with in healthcare, with sudden costs, with not being able to afford the things you need to live your life. And he's 100% right about that. And to the extent that Trump has been successful, it's because he's latched onto that populist strain in America. And yet that runs smack dab into the reduce the size of government wing of Republicans. What is going on right now? What is the discussion like in Republican circles?
So look, it's complicated. This is the best way to get into this. From a strategist perspective, it's a fine line that we're all trying to walk, because we need those conservative, and look, I would say a lot of independent and even some conservative Democrat voters want to see a smaller, more robust kind of government. But we have the whims of the president, all that the retribution that can come with that, that constantly causes us to spin in a million different directions. What I will say is, underground, if you will, Republicans are feeling angry. They're feeling the pinch. This is not what they voted for. This is not what they want. I remind everybody, for Republicans, it was a choice. You had Trump, you had Harris. For a lot of Republicans, that was an easy choice. What I am starting to see, and we'll be very curious to see what happens in 26, is how much of those Republicans push back. This is the piece that worries me. And this is why I started this by saying I think Republicans are a mess right now. I think we've abandoned core principles, whether it's debt ceiling, whether it's eliminating debt ceiling, whether it's tax increases, whether it's any of these other progressive kind of things that Trump embraces and now Republicans have to somehow tie themselves into knots to get to. When I talk to Republicans, people on the ground, it's not what they want to see. And I think MAGA is going to run into an interesting problem if Democrats figure out their stuff. Again, if Democrats
then you're
stay
fine.
on the
Don't
sidelines,
worry.
yeah, but if Democrats figure this out, you guys have a chance at picking up the majorities in House and Senate, because I think Republicans, you're more traditional Republicans. And by traditional, I'm not talking moderate. I'm talking conservative Republicans, the party of Reagan, Bush. These just, we're not that far removed from this. Those Republicans are looking at this saying, I don't like this. And they don't like what Josh Hawley is trying to say. They don't like wanting to increase the minimum wage. They're not going to support this stuff. But if the Democrats give a wackadoodle as their nominee, they'll support it. And I think this is, and I want to bring this back to one other point.
Please.
This is why this tribalism, this we have red versus blue, really comes into a problem. Because I think the natural assumption is that the Republican Party as a whole is embracing all of this MAGA craziness. It's not. It's just my choice is that or this.
Yeah.
And I'm going towards this because I have these conversations, and a lot of Republicans, and there are a lot of groups that are starting to really form that are trying to get us back to more traditional conservative values and not this shit show that we're seeing in Washington right now.
It really would be there's been so much discussion in nerd circles, in politics nerd circles, of the Lee Drutman model. He's a political scientist at the New America Foundation, and he's been screaming from the rooftops, and occasionally he breaks into the New York Times with an op-ed that's, we really should have multi-member districts, congressional districts, closer to the parliamentary system. Or there are some people who say we should have the actual parliamentary system, where, you know, you have multi-parties and you have to assemble a governing majority and form a government and et cetera. Look, sometimes you end up with insane results like Netanyahu in Israel. So it's not a guarantee that you end up with a better reflection of the political reality, what people actually want. It certainly can go awry any number of ways. But you're putting your finger on an interesting point, which is within the 85%, like fat middle of the discouraged and exhausted majority, there are definite flavors that I would be interested in. I would be interested in seeing reflected, and there would be a potential for coalitions on any number of topics that would cross the swim lanes that we have established. There are only 2 swim lanes right now, and we've really locked ourselves into, you know, what really drives me crazy. I literally, as we're talking, I was getting a text from an old Capitol Hill friend who's had a very distinguished career as a staffer in the U.S. Senate, and it was just reminding me of both parties have gotten locked into almost a war games scenario, like that 1983 Matthew Broderick movie, of like tit for tat, bipolar world of, and the strategy, the dominant strategy for both parties has become, I am going to try to grab all the power that I can in the next election, try to get a trifecta, and then just ride it as hard as I can for this short window. And surely that will be the end of my opposition. I'll just lock in whatever I can. And then the tide will turn and it'll swing the other way. And then they'll do the same thing. It's the opposite of what you were saying a moment ago, which is there's no law that says that Trump couldn't have come into office and said, okay, look, besides the fact that he's a fucking crazy person, but there's no law that says that he couldn't, a functional Trump couldn't have come into office and said, okay, I know very clearly from polling that what voters care about is prices, immigration really resonated with them, and cultural issues. That was number 3.
It was.
People thought Kamala Harris was too woke. That's what they told. By the way, if you're listening to this and you're a Democrat and you're like, oh, come on, that sounds like Republicans, but this is from Blueprint. This is from a Democratic polling firm. This was the number 3 issue, and the number 1 issue with swing voters was cultural issues and the perception that Kamala was too woke. You could have seen Trump take a kind of conservative ish, but somewhat populist, just go where the votes are kind of approach. And it would have really jammed the Democrats. It would have really put us in a tough position and forced to, anyway, I'm on a bit of a rant. I want to go back to spiking Republicans. Oh, go.
Yeah, but let me go there, because
kind
of, even if Trump stayed Trump, Republicans in Congress, Speaker Johnson, these guys could have taken their duty seriously as a co-equal branch of government.
And now you're dreaming.
Yeah, and imagine that, and actually put forth a conservative agenda. This big, beautiful bill, a disaster, is something we have opposed forever. We always wanted standalone legislation, debated on the merits, give up and down, give us plenty of time to read it. Those were all the things we were talking about during Obama. Now we throw everything in and just go vote on it. And we got people like Marjorie Taylor Greene saying, I didn't really read that part. No, of course I didn't read that part, but I voted for it anyway. What should have happened was the Congress asserted a conservative approach. We could have come in, forced Trump to sign those things, forced Trump not to. You can find some similarities. There would have been enough similarities. They wouldn't have opposed the president, but we could have actually done this thing the right way. Where Republicans are failing is that we are not making the case to the American people. We're hoping that Trump just bleeds into it and the Democrats screw up. And hoping the other side screw up is not a good campaign plan. It's never a good idea.
And it's fundamentally illiberal. And I mean that not in the political, I mean that in the sense of liberal governments. We're not testing ideas. We're not debating ideas. We're not debating policies. Back when I was in grad school, I took a course on persuasion. And one of the core techniques in political persuasion is to turn attention to what are called valence issues. Attach what you're saying to a valence. In chemistry, valence is you're either on the left side or the right side. It's all polar, right? It's one side or the other. Turn things into a valence issue. So you're in the George W. era, it was you're either with me or you're with the terrorists.
Right.
You remember that? That was
fun, yeah. Right? Remember when that was the big issue of the day?
And now, and we're going back there in a second. And now it's because it's basically you're with Trump or you're not with Trump. And it is so much like the scene in Coming to America where Eddie Murphy, where Prince Hakeem meets his intended bride and he says, what do you like? Whatever you like.
Yeah.
Kind? And that's literally what the Republican Party has done to itself. No platform. The platform says we will do whatever Trump says. So he says, vote for whatever is in this thing. And even when what is in that thing changes, you are expected to go along with it and to change your position along with it and to be Marjorie Taylor Greene and to be like, I'm in favor of it. I didn't even read it.
Yeah, exactly. It's how we have devolved into this. Look, there's books been written about it, but it's why a lot of Republicans don't feel like we have a home in the party anymore. And that's why you start to see a lot of Republicans starting to fight back and pull this to a place that we're looking at who's there in districts that we can start to have impact and start trying to pull our party back from the brink of, I think, absolute unmitigated disaster.
There's no coherent political philosophy anymore. It's just, you have just literally said, like Prince Hakeem's intended bride, we will do whatever Trump says. And that is not, it is a great short-term prescription for winning elections now. Certain elections. It is a disaster. It is a bomb going off in the middle of your party long-term. Speaking of a bomb going off, here's another thing that's dividing Republicans. Time was that the George H.W. Bush wing of the party was filled with hawkish internationalists, I would say. There was a sect of them within the State Department that called themselves, I'm not making this up, the Vulcans, because they were also nerds. And they had a coherent philosophy. And again, for my friends in the Democratic Party who are regular listeners here, I want to be clear. I'm not suddenly endorsing Matt's conservative political philosophy. Like, we don't agree necessarily on all these things.
Right.
I would just much rather have that presented as a coherent alternative that we could then debate through a democratic process and achieve a healthy give and take about. That would be much better for America. But anyway, there was a coherent philosophy there. And once again, with this bombing of Iran, you see this, it was just palpable. I am seriously in Diogenes went searching through the streets of Athens with a lantern looking for an honest man. I want to go, I'm a modern Diogenes. I want to go find a Republican with a spinal column these days. You had these figures going on TV like, oh, no, don't bomb Iran. Worst thing ever. Steve Bannon. No, we can't be interventionalists. All of a sudden, the bomb is released, and they're like, this is the greatest thing we've ever done. Trump.
Oh, it's worse. I saw Republicans proclaim him the greatest president in American history because he dropped some bombs, or they should get the Nobel Peace Prize. Now, I'm not sure dropping bombs qualifies you for a Nobel Peace Prize.
He then said, okay, I'm dropping no more bombs. Therefore, I've created peace.
There we go. That all makes perfect sense.
Absolutely.
And the problem, look, there's a lot of problems here. I liken this to the Godfather strategy of foreign policy. I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse. And then now I'm going to go and drop a bomb and show that it's when Reagan, because I looked this up, when Reagan had airstrikes on Libya, if you read that speech, Reagan goes through and he talks about the why. He says, this is why we did this. If you look at Gulf War, the coalition of the willing, like presidents came on TV when they took such actions and explained to the world why. And they lobbied Congress and they got the information. This president went on and just did a victory lap. Never told us one reason why we did this today or Saturday. It's for decades we've been worried about a nuclear Iran. For decades, they've crossed red lines. For decades, they have problems. Was there new intelligence? Was there a reason we needed to do this? Or was Trump just mad at all the taco memes and decided he needed to do something to show that he wasn't a wimp? Like, we don't know the reason. And what makes it worse and frustrating as a Republican is, where's Congress trying to find this answer? Why is Congress not investigating what in the world we just do? Because we do have separation of powers, and the Constitution's pretty specific about what a president can do. And I've heard the arguments, yeah, Obama took out Osama bin Laden and he didn't. Look, we knew the reasons why we're going after Osama bin Laden. Presidents had made that case. So it wasn't, Obama didn't need to make the case to the American people. And why? Trump still hasn't made the case. He's just acted. And that, to me, is a problem. But the bigger problem is that Republicans in Congress are all over the map. They were against it and now they're for it. And now we're not doing anything. And it's ridiculous.
No, you know what? You've really put your finger on something to me, which is the dysfunction is in Congress. And it's, look, Democrats, I've let you, for my own emotional satisfaction, criticize Republicans as a party and in Congress for a few minutes now. So I feel like, just to keep things even, I want to say that I'm not exactly falling over myself with praise for Democrats in Congress. Okay. There's the rest of America, according to recent polling.
Yeah.
That said, the abdication of responsibility and the oath they took when they assumed office, and the public trust that was given to them when voters elected them to their position of public power, immense power, is truly shocking. And you're right. I hadn't really formulated it that way in my own mind, but the abdication of responsibility is so breathtaking, and it's subtle. It's subtle because we get so focused and put on tilt by Trump that we thought, you know what? There is a co-equal branch here, and they are giving cover for the dysfunction. They are allowing idiots like Pete Hegseth to hold positions of immense life or death power, and then to come before Congress and testify, oh yeah, we totally obliterated those sites, because that's what Trump instructed him to do. Trump is on tilt right now. Speaking of being on tilt, Trump absolutely apoplectic by deeply sourced reporting from CNN and the New York Times that, in fact, there wasn't that much damage done by these bombs, and Fordo remains intact, and probably most of the fissile material was secreted away beforehand, because because you can get into the trunks of 10 cars, by the way, and the centrifuges are probably moved off site. And what really frosts me is this isn't on necessarily the Iran piece is bad enough, but you have a senator like Cassidy, who's a doc, says during RFK Jr.'s confirmation hearing, you're not going to fuck with the vaccine process. You're not going to mess with the board that makes recommendations on vaccines. No, Senator, I won't do. 5 minutes later, after confirmation, he turns around and does just that. He fires all 17 members of the vaccine board, and he replaces them with conspiracy theorists who do not believe in vaccines. Doctors are going into the op-ed pages saying, people are going to die because of this. There is a vulnerability that we have now created to biological terrorism because you have a Secretary of Health and Human Services who does not believe in germ theory, literally does not believe in germ theory. Could we do an Operation Warp Speed, which was actually a success under Donald Trump? Could we do something like that today? Probably not.
No.
We are literally creating a situation where Americans are going to die because of this nut job. And where is the Republican Senate? Where are they holding these people accountable?
They're not. And that's the problem. You have a handful. You have a handful of senators that are holding accountable. You have a handful of members of Congress that are holding accountable. But I saw a member of Congress the other day say on national television that they trust the Israeli intelligence about the bombs and the destruction over U.S. intelligence. Because the Israeli intelligence said we obliterated them. Like, it's just because that's what Trump wanted them to do. And by falling in line where we put party before the country and we put their devotion to Trump over the country, we are missing all the pieces that should have in a healthy republic. The reason I expect every president to try to push their limits of power. Obama tried it, Reagan tried it, Bush tried it. They do. That's what they do. Most of them understand what those limits are, and there are a lot of self-imposed, but it's usually also Congress that holds them accountable, not this Congress. This Congress just lets this president get away with whatever he wants to, and it's a disaster. And that's where I get why the Republican Party is a mess right now, because this is not what we fundamentally believe. We believe in smaller, less government. We believe devotion to the Constitution. Those are how we've won these elections. And for many of the Republicans that were elected in 2024, most of those voters believe that they would uphold that. And they've given up on it. They've abandoned their authority. They've abdicated what they are supposed to do. And there will be consequences in the next election cycle. Not all of them. Some of these districts are drawn in a way that they'll never lose. But there will be Democrats that will take us out because they've given up. And we've run to the camera too quickly, or gone on social media too quickly to declare Trump the greatest president in American history because he dropped some bombs.
And maybe this is a good place to end on, because, again, what I'm pushing for, what I feel like I've pushed for in my whole career, congressional staffer, not as a campaign manager where my job is literally like yours, to beat Republicans, okay? When I've been working in the analyst or in the government space, what I have consistently wanted is a coherent opposition party that we could test the strength of our arguments against and occasionally find some common ground with, because I believe that those hybrid common ground solutions are typically the most enduring, the most robust, and the best. I think that either party left to its own devices tends to metastasize in unhealthy directions. And I'm not saying that I want Republicans to win or to thrive, or that I believe in the conservative vision of American government. What I'm saying is I would like to have that as a foil for Democrats, because what you were saying a moment ago is that the Republican Party you grew up in, and you might not be a Republican if you were growing up in it today. I don't know. I don't know what you would do with this Trump Republican Party. But the Republican Party that you grew up in appealed to you and created in you or aligned with what you naturally had as a conservative vision for the role of government in America and what government should be doing. And look, another aspect, I will just say as a quick sideline, another aspect of the Republican Party of 30 years ago, 20 years ago, is socially conservative values. But we've seen that those values can evolve. Republican support for marriage equality has reached 70%. It's not that it has to be entirely retrograde social values, but you had a conservative vision. And one of the things that I think has happened to Democrats is that because we don't have that to run against, because we've had the luxury of saying Trump is awful, he's an authoritarian fascist threat to America, and before anything else, let's run against that. Because we've had the luxury of that, we have done very little thinking in the last 10 years to update what is our vision of government? What's the role of government? Ask a Democrat in a debate. Next time you're doing debate prep for one of your Republican candidates, tell them, if they're going to be in a televised debate, to pose a question to their Democratic opponent. How would you help create jobs for Americans? Toughest question for Democrats to answer, because in the absence of being forced to do some coherent thinking about that, what we've fallen back on is answers supplied to us from the Bernie wing of the party, which is another big government program. And I'm not saying that all of those answers are wrong. Far from it. I think Medicare is great. I think Social Security is great. I'm just saying that we have not come up with new modern answers to those questions, certainly in a long time. And the lack of that forcing function, I think, hurts us in the long run as much as it hurts you.
I 100% agree. I think one of the things that, one of the things I love about doing this podcast, for example, with you, is this is what it's supposed to be. We can come at it from different angles. You and I don't agree on approach. We just agree on how we want that. There's an end game we can get to. And so traditionally, where we've been successful as a country is we battle it out on the election. And then we battle it out on the floor of Congress and we come up with stuff. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. But we disagree, we fight, we get there. But we understand that the role of government should be to serve the people. And we've given up on that, especially on our side, in the raw pursuit of power. And I think where Republicans continue, and what I continue to see, is that as a conservative, and I'll bring up another one your listeners will absolutely love, is Rush Limbaugh used to always talk about how conservatives, it works every time it's been tried. And I think for a lot of us, we see that. And we see where we've been able to make government smaller, more efficient, work better, not run like a business. That's just a campaign messaging. We know that doesn't work. But we know that government can be effective if we scale it back. Our fear has always been, for the longest time, Rush Limbaugh would talk about this all the time, is that too many Republicans, and at the time it was people like Lindsey Graham, would appeal to the press and appeal and give up on our values so Democrats like us. And as a result, we'd compromise so that we'd give up our stuff to the Democrats and the Democrats would get the win. The reality is now, though, we've compromised our principles so that Trump likes us, so that MAGA likes us, so that wing of the party will keep voting for us. And as a result, we've abandoned our principles. We've given up everything Rush Limbaugh has ever said to conservatism for as long as he has. And we're at risk of losing because voters don't trust us. They just may trust us more than Democrats, but voters don't trust Republicans right now because they don't know what we stand for. They don't know where we are, what we want to do, where we want to take the country. And we've been beneficial because of who we've run against, not what we've run on.
I think we have to leave it there. I think we do. I'm so tempted to keep going on this. I'd love to talk about Sam Brownback and the Kansas experiment of radical tax cutting, which had to get clawed back because turns out the Laffer curve is not real. I'd love to.
Save it for a live stream so we can get all those.
I'd love to fix Social Security with you live right now, but let's punt it. All right, we'll do a live stream. We'll take this to next time. In the meantime, All right, State, I'm going to release you back into the wild. Okay, this is catch and release. Okay, you're an exotic wildlife specimen, a real life Republican. You are released, sir, and I will see you.